The autumn wind howled against the towering windows of the Wellington mansion, creating an eerie symphony that echoed through the grand foyer where Maya Wellington lay curled on the unforgiving Italian marble floor. At 19 years old, her body had unfortunately adapted to sleeping on various uncomfortable surfaces throughout the sprawling estate, a cruel reality that had become her nightly routine for the past 5 years, ever since Victoria Ashford became Victoria Wellington, and transformed Maya's life into a living nightmare. Tonight's sleeping arrangement was particularly vindictive. The entrance hall, with its soaring 30-foot ceilings and intimidating crystal chandelier, served as the mansion's grand welcome to visitors. Anyone entering or leaving would witness Maya's humiliation sprawled across marble that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. The symbolic cruelty wasn't lost on Maya. Victoria wanted her to understand that she belonged on the ground, beneath everyone who entered this house. The threadbare blanket Maya clutched provided little protection against the October chill that seemed to penetrate every corner of the supposedly climate-controlled mansion. Victoria had specifically instructed the household staff to keep the foyer temperature economical during the night hours, another calculated torture designed to make Maya's punishment as miserable as possible. The central heating system hummed somewhere within the walls, warming the family's private quarters upstairs while leaving the first floor uncomfortably cool. Earlier that evening, Maya had committed what Victoria considered an unforgivable transgression. She had dared to ask about community college enrollment. The confrontation had unfolded in Richard's mahogany-paneled study, where leather-bound books lined the walls and the scent of expensive cigars lingered in the air. Maya had approached her father after the family's formal dinner, her carefully researched presentation about evening classes and financial aid programs organized in a manila folder. "Dad, I've been looking into Hartford Community College's business program," Maya had begun, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "They offer evening classes that would work around my job schedule, and I've already researched several scholarship opportunities that could cover most of the tuition costs." Richard Wellington III had looked up from his financial documents, his once strong features now marked by the stress lines that had appeared during his struggling marriage to Victoria. At 52, he bore little resemblance to the confident man who had built Wellington Textiles into a regional powerhouse. His shoulders sagged with the weight of business failures and personal compromises that had slowly eroded his character over the past decade. Before Richard could respond, Victoria had swept into the study like a designer-clad hurricane. Her presence immediately filled the room with tension, her perfectly styled blonde hair and flawless makeup creating an intimidating contrast to Maya's simple jeans and sweater. At 41, Victoria possessed the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive treatments and unlimited resources, but her pale blue eyes held a coldness that could freeze water. "College?" Victoria had laughed, the sound sharp and cutting as crystal breaking against stone. "For someone like you? Maya, darling, you need to develop a more realistic understanding of your place in this world. You're not Wellington material. You're simply the housekeeper's daughter who happens to share a surname through an unfortunate accident of birth." Maya's hands had tightened around her folder. "I'm Richard's daughter, and I have every right to pursue an education. I'm not asking for financial support. I've planned to pay for everything myself through work-study programs and student loans." Victoria had turned to Richard with raised eyebrows, as if Maya's declaration was the most amusing thing she'd heard all day. "Richard, dear, surely you're not going to encourage this fantasy. The girl needs to understand reality. Her mother was nothing more than hired help who got lucky for a brief moment. Lightning doesn't strike twice in the same family." Richard had remained silent, his gaze fixed on the papers scattered across his desk. Maya had watched her father's face, searching for any sign of the man who had once encouraged her dreams, who had praised her academic achievements, who had promised that she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. But that man seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone who chose the path of least resistance in every confrontation with his demanding wife. Furthermore, Victoria had continued, her voice gaining strength from Richard's silence, "Your very presence in this house is a constant reminder of scandal and poor judgment. You should be grateful we allow you to remain here at all, considering the damage your mother's relationship with Richard caused to our family's reputation in Hartford society." Maya had felt her cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. "My mother was a wonderful woman who loved this family. She worked harder than anyone to make this house a home, and she deserved better than to have her memory disrespected by someone who never even knew her." The temperature in the room had dropped several degrees as Victoria's expression hardened into something resembling polished marble. "Your mother," she had said slowly, each word dripping with disdain, "was an opportunistic woman who seduced a grieving widower and trapped him with an unwanted pregnancy. The fact that Richard felt obligated to marry her doesn't change what she truly was." "That's enough," Maya had whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "No, dear, it's not nearly enough," Victoria had replied smoothly. "Since you seem to have forgotten your place in this household, perhaps spending the night on the foyer floor will help remind you exactly where you belong in the Wellington family hierarchy." Richard had finally looked up from his desk, meeting Maya's desperate gaze for just a moment before looking away again. In that brief instant, Maya had seen something that broke her heart. Not just weakness, but genuine shame. Her father knew Victoria's treatment was wrong, but he lacked the courage to stand up for his own daughter. Now, hours later, Maya lay on the cold marble surrounded by the trappings of inherited wealth that would never belong to her. The foyer showcased 4 generations of Wellington prosperity: hand-carved moldings imported from Italy, Persian rugs worth more than luxury cars, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who gazed down from their gilded frames with expressions of perpetual disapproval. The crystal chandelier above her head contained over 300 individual pieces, each one hand-cut and perfectly positioned to create rainbow patterns when sunlight streamed through the tall windows during the day. Maya had spent countless hours as a child counting those crystals, fascinated by how they caught and reflected light. Now the chandelier seemed to mock her with its expensive beauty, a constant reminder of everything she could see but never truly possess. Maya's half-brother James enjoyed a completely different existence within these same walls. At 21, he occupied the entire east wing of the mansion, complete with a private gaming room equipped with the latest technology, a home theater with leather recliners and a popcorn machine, and a fully equipped gym that he rarely used. His monthly allowance exceeded what most families spent on housing, and his credit cards carried no spending limits. Victoria treated him like visiting royalty, constantly praising his most mundane accomplishments while ignoring his obvious failures. James had been expelled from 2 prestigious universities for academic misconduct and alcohol-related incidents, yet Victoria continued to make excuses for his behavior while publicly criticizing Maya for working multiple jobs to support herself. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. James spent his days sleeping until noon, playing video games, and racing expensive sports cars around Hartford's suburban streets, while Maya maintained perfect grades and worked evenings at Rosie's diner to save money for her future. The injustice burned in Maya's chest like molten metal. She had graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, while working 25 hours per week to pay for her own clothes, school supplies, and personal expenses. She had taught herself advanced business principles by reading discarded textbooks from Yale University's library sales, often staying up until 3 in the morning to study after completing her restaurant shifts. She had even developed a small jewelry-making business, selling handcrafted pieces to classmates and saving every dollar toward her college fund. But none of her achievements mattered to Victoria, who viewed Maya's very existence as a threat to her carefully constructed social position. Victoria had married into the Wellington name 5 years ago, bringing with her the pedigree of old Connecticut money and social connections that Richard's struggling business desperately needed. She had immediately set about reshaping the family's public image, which apparently required erasing any trace of Richard's first marriage and the daughter it had produced. Maya's mother, Elena Vasquez, had been the daughter of the mansion's head groundskeeper, a brilliant woman who spoke 4 languages fluently and had been working toward her accounting degree at the University of Hartford when she met Richard. Their love story had unfolded like something from a romance novel, the wealthy businessman's son falling for the gardener's intelligent, beautiful daughter despite their different social backgrounds. Elena had possessed an inner strength that no amount of social prejudice could diminish. She had loved Richard genuinely while maintaining her own identity, her own dreams, her own sense of self-worth that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or acceptance. Even after marrying Richard and moving into the mansion, Elena had continued her education, eventually earning her degree and helping to modernize Wellington Textile's accounting systems. The fairy tale had ended abruptly when Maya was 14. Elena had been driving home from a night class when a drunk driver ran a red light, killing her instantly, Richard had been devastated, retreating into grief and alcohol, while Maya struggled to process the loss of the person who had been her anchor, her protector, her greatest champion. Within 6 months of Elena's funeral, Richard had met Victoria at a charity fundraiser. Within a year, they were married in an elaborate ceremony that made the society pages of every Connecticut newspaper. Victoria had moved into the mansion like a conquering army, immediately establishing new rules, new hierarchies, new expectations for everyone under the Wellington roof. Victoria's campaign to diminish Maya's place in the family had been subtle. Initially, small comments about appropriate behavior, suggestions that Maya might be more comfortable taking her meals in the kitchen with the staff, gradual restrictions on which areas of the house were suitable for someone of her background. But as Victoria's confidence grew and Richard's resistance weakened, the psychological warfare had become increasingly overt. The marble floor beneath Maya felt like a sheet of ice against her body, each breath creating small clouds in the chilly October air. She could hear the old house settling around her, wooden beams creaking with age and the accumulated weight of secrets. Somewhere in the walls, mice scurried through hidden passages between the rooms, and the ancient radiators clanked with irregular rhythm as the heating system struggled to maintain consistent temperatures throughout the massive structure. Maya closed her eyes and tried to summon her mother's voice, the way Elena used to sing Spanish lullabies while braiding Maya's long dark hair. Elena had taught her daughter to be proud of their heritage, to understand that strength came not from where you started in life, but from how far you were willing to climb to reach your dreams. Mija, Elena used to say while helping Maya with homework at the kitchen table, never let anyone make you feel smaller than you are. You carry the dreams of everyone who came before you and the hopes of everyone who will come after. That's a powerful responsibility and a beautiful gift. Those words echoed in Maya's mind as she stared up at the painted ceiling of the foyer, where cherubs and clouds swirled in an elaborate fresco commissioned by some long-dead Wellington ancestor. During the mansion's construction in the 1890s, the artwork had faded slightly over the decades, but it still maintained its grandeur, a testament to the family's historical wealth and social aspirations. Tomorrow would bring more of the same cruel treatment, subtle humiliations designed to chip away at her self-esteem, deliberate exclusions from family activities and decisions, constant reminders that she was tolerated rather than welcomed in her own father's house. Victoria would find new ways to make her feel worthless, and Richard would continue his cowardly silence, choosing his wife's approval over his daughter's well-being. But something fundamental had shifted inside Maya tonight, some crucial change in the way she understood her circumstances. The cold marble beneath her wasn't just punishment anymore, it was motivation. Every uncomfortable night, every cruel comment, every deliberate slight was adding fuel to a fire that burned hotter with each passing hour. Maya reached beneath her makeshift pillow and pulled out a battered composition notebook where she recorded her thoughts, her plans, her dreams for the future. By the faint light filtering through the tall windows from the street lamps outside, she began to write, October 15th, 2019. They think they can break my spirit by making me sleep on this floor. They think they can convince me I'm worthless by treating me like I don't belong in this house, in this family, in this social class. But they're wrong about everything. This floor isn't my prison. It's my foundation. Every night I spend here makes me stronger, more determined, more focused on the future I'm going to build with my own hands. She paused, pen hovering over the page as she considered her next words carefully. I won't always be on this floor. One day I'll own every inch of this mansion, every piece of furniture, every expensive painting, every crystal in that chandelier above my head. I'll sit in that leather chair where my father should have defended me but chose silence instead. I'll walk through these halls with my head held high, not because I was born into wealth, but because I earned my place through hard work, determination, and the kind of courage that apparently skips generations in the Wellington family. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, its deep resonance marking the transition from one day to the next. Maya closed her notebook and tucked it back under her pillow, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth despite her uncomfortable situation. Around her, the mansion slept peacefully, its wealthy occupants comfortable in their warm beds, secure in their positions of privilege and power. Victoria was probably sleeping soundly in the master suite, satisfied with another successful evening of psychological warfare. Richard was likely tossing restlessly, his conscience wrestling with his cowardice. James was undoubtedly passed out, in his gaming chair, surrounded by energy drink cans and the detritus of another wasted day. But Maya wasn't sleeping. Her mind was racing with possibilities, with plans, with the fierce determination that would carry her from this cold marble, Florida heights none of them could imagine. She was Elena's daughter, after all, and Elena had taught her that true strength came not from where you started, but from how far you were willing to climb. The autumn wind picked up outside, rattling the windows with renewed force and sending dead leaves skittering across the circular driveway. Maya pulled her thin blanket tighter and whispered to the empty foyer, "This is where my story begins, but it's not where it ends. Watch me rise." Setting, downtown Hartford, Connecticut. 6 months later, April 22nd, 2020. The brass bell above Rosie's diner chimed with its familiar melody as Maya pushed through the glass door, her textile factory uniform still wrinkled and stained from another grueling 16-hour shift at Hartford Industrial Fabrics. The smell of coffee, bacon grease, and fresh baked pie enveloped her like a warm embrace, a stark contrast to the chemical odors and machine noise that had filled her day since 5 in the morning. Her work boots clicked against the checkered linoleum floor as she made her way to her usual spot at the worn Formica counter. "You look like something the cat dragged in, honey," called Rosie Martinez from behind the coffee station, her weathered hands already reaching for Maya's regular cup, a chipped ceramic mug with "World's Best Mom" printed in fading letters. At 63 years old, Rosie had been running this diner for over 30 years, serving coffee and comfort to Hartford's working class with equal measures of sass and maternal care. Maya slumped onto the cracked vinyl stool, feeling every muscle in her body protest after spending the day operating heavy machinery in the textile plant's humid, poorly ventilated workspace. "When's the last time you got more than 4 hours of sleep?" Rosie asked, setting the steaming coffee in front of Maya without being asked. "Sleep is a luxury I can't afford right now," Maya replied, pulling a worn leather notebook from her backpack. The notebook was filled with sketches, business plans, market research, and financial calculations, all scribbled during her few precious break moments between her factory job, her evening shifts at the diner, and her weekend work cleaning. Office buildings downtown. Rosie leaned against the counter, studying Maya's exhausted face with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many young people work themselves to the bone chasing dreams that seemed impossibly distant. "Honey, you're going to burn yourself out before you even get started. What's got you so fired up that you're willing to kill yourself working?" Maya opened her notebook to a page covered with detailed sketches of clothing designs and manufacturing cost analyses. "Look at this, Rosie. I've been studying the textile market for months now, analyzing consumer trends, researching sustainable manufacturing processes. There's a huge gap in the market for environmentally responsible, locally made clothing. Small, batch production, high-quality materials, fair wages for workers. Everything the big corporations aren't doing." She flipped through several pages of meticulous research, her voice gaining energy despite her physical exhaustion. "Most clothing companies have moved their manufacturing overseas to cut costs, but they're sacrificing quality and ethics in the process. Consumers are starting to care about where their clothes come from, how they're made, who's making them. There's a real opportunity here for someone willing to do things differently." Rosie poured herself a cup of coffee and settled onto the stool beside Maya, her expression shifting from concern to genuine interest. "You've really thought this through, haven't you? But starting a business takes capital, and from what I can see, you're barely keeping your head above water with living expenses." Maya's shoulders sagged slightly as reality reasserted itself. 6 months had passed since that night on the Wellington mansion's marble floor, and despite working multiple jobs, she had managed to save only $3,000 toward her business dreams. The cost of even a small textile operation seemed impossibly daunting. Industrial sewing machines, fabric, inventory, workspace rental, legal fees, marketing expenses. The numbers in her notebook showed she would need at least $50,000 to launch even a modest operation. "I know it seems impossible," Maya admitted, closing the notebook and wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug. "But I can't keep living like this, Rosie. I can't spend the rest of my life working dead-end jobs while Victoria makes my father's house feel like a prison. Every day I stay there, every cruel comment she makes, every time my father chooses her comfort over his own daughter's dignity, it's killing something inside me." Rosie's expression softened with understanding. She had heard pieces of Maya's story over the months, enough to know that the girl was fighting battles both at home and in the working world. Your mother raised a fighter, that's for sure. Elena would be proud of how hard you're working, but she'd also want you to be smart about it. Maya looked up sharply. You knew my mother? Knew her? Rosie laughed, but the sound was warm with affection. Honey, Elena Vasquez was my best friend for over 15 years. She used to come in here every Tuesday after her night classes at the university, order a slice of apple pie and tell me all about her dreams of becoming an accountant, of proving that a groundskeeper's daughter could be just as smart as any of those rich kids at Yale. Maya's heart began racing. In the 5 years since Elena's death, no one had spoken to her about her mother's life before the accident. Victoria had systematically removed every photograph, every personal item, every trace of Elena from the Wellington mansion. Richard had retreated so deeply into his guilt and grief that he couldn't bear to discuss his first wife. Maya had been left with only her own memories and the growing fear that she would eventually forget her mother's voice, her laugh, her dreams. She never told me she came here, Maya whispered, her eyes filling with tears she had been holding back for months. Rosie stood up and disappeared into the back office, returning with a yellowed manila envelope that looked like it had been carefully preserved for years. Elena made me promise to give this to you when you were ready to fight for yourself. She said I'd know when that time came, and honey, looking at those business plans and seeing that fire in your eyes despite everything you've been through, I think that time is now. Maya's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. Her name was written across the front in her mother's distinctive handwriting, the ink slightly faded but still clearly legible. Inside was a bank statement from Hartford National Bank showing an account balance of $47,238, money her mother had secretly saved from her housekeeping wages and her part-time bookkeeping work for small businesses around Hartford. She started that account the day you were born, Rosie explained softly. Every week she would deposit whatever she could spare, sometimes $20, sometimes just $5, depending on what your father was going through with the business. She never told Richard about it because she wanted it to be completely yours, untouchable by anyone else's financial problems or family drama. Beneath the bank statement was a letter written on Elena's personal stationery, the paper slightly yellowed with age, but the words still clear and strong. My dearest Maya, if you are reading this letter, it means you have found the strength and determination I always knew you possessed. The money in this account isn't much compared to the wealth that surrounds you in the Wellington mansion, but it represents something far more valuable. It represents freedom. I saved every penny I could because I knew that someday you would need the independence to make your own choices, to follow your own dreams, to build the life you deserve rather than accepting whatever scraps others are willing to give you. I have watched you since you were small, seen your intelligence, your creativity, your fierce heart, and I know you are destined for greatness. Don't let anyone convince you that you are less than extraordinary because of where you come from or what your last name happens to be. The Vasquez women have always been fighters, and the Wellington men have always been dreamers. You have the best of both legacies flowing through your veins. Use this money wisely, but more importantly, use it boldly. Take risks, make mistakes, fail spectacularly if you must, but never ever settle for a small life just because it feels safer. You were born to build something beautiful in this world, and I will be watching from wherever mothers go to watch their daughters become the women they were meant to be. All my love, always and forever. Mama P.S. Rosie Martinez knows more about starting a business than anyone I've ever met. Listen to her advice, but trust your own instincts above all else. Maya was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face as she read her mother's words over and over again. The letter felt like a message from beyond the grave, a final gift of love and encouragement from the person who had believed in her most. She was so proud of you, Rosie said gently, placing a comforting hand on Maya's shoulder. Even when you were little, she used to talk about how you were going to change the world someday. She said you had fire in your belly and steel in your spine, just like her grandmother who came to this country with nothing but determination and built a life for her family through sheer force of will. Maya wiped her eyes with a paper napkin, trying to process the magnitude of what she had just discovered. $47,000 was more money than she had ever imagined having access to. But more than that, it was proof that her mother had believed in her future, had planned for her success, had made sacrifices to ensure Maya would have choices. What am I supposed to do now? Maya asked, her voice shaky with emotion and overwhelming possibility. Rosie smiled and refilled both their coffee cups. Now you stop working yourself to death in that textile factory and start building the business you've been dreaming about. But first, you need to get smart about it. Having startup capital is just the beginning. You need a real business plan, legal advice, market research, a solid understanding of the fashion industry's supply chains. She pulled out a pen and began writing on a fresh napkin. I know a lawyer who helps small businesses with incorporation and contracts, Maria Santos. She's honest and charges fair rates. There's a business development center at the community college that offers free counseling for entrepreneurs. And my nephew Carlos runs a small textile operation in New Haven. He could teach you about sourcing materials and managing production. Maya stared at the list Rosie was creating, feeling hope and terror in equal measure. But what if I fail? What if I waste my mother's money on a dream that's too big for someone like me? Someone like you? Rosie's eyes flashed with sudden fire. Maya Vasquez Wellington, you are the daughter of a woman who put herself through college while working 2 jobs and raising a child. You are the granddaughter of immigrants who built successful lives in a country that didn't always welcome them with open arms. You have intelligence, determination, and now you have the resources to back up your dreams. The only way you can fail is if you don't try. The diner was nearly empty at this late hour. Just a few truck drivers and night shift workers scattered among the vinyl booths. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the warm, slightly harsh glow that made honest conversations feel both intimate and exposed. Maya looked around at the simple, hard-working atmosphere of Rosie's place and realized this was where her real education had taken place, not in the cold formality of the Wellington mansion, but in this diner where real people talked about real dreams and real struggles. Rosie, Maya said slowly, would you be willing to help me? I mean, really help me figure out how to do this right? I know you didn't ask to become my business mentor, but, honey, Rosie interrupted with a laugh, I've been waiting for you to ask that question for months. Elena made me promise to look out for you, and I've been trying to figure out how to honor that promise without overstepping. But if you want my help building something real, something that would make your mother proud, then I'm all in. Maya felt a surge of gratitude and determination, unlike anything she had experienced since her mother's death. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone in her dreams. She had an ally, a mentor, and most importantly, she had her mother's final gift of both financial resources and unshakable faith in her potential. There's something else, Maya said, pulling out her cell phone to show Rosie a text message she had received that afternoon. I got this from my supervisor at the factory. They're laying off 20% of the workforce next month, and since I'm one of the newest hires, I'll probably be let go. Instead of looking concerned, Rosie smiled broadly. Perfect timing. The universe is pushing you toward your destiny, whether you're ready or not. Maya stared at her in disbelief. Perfect? I'm about to lose my main source of income. No, honey, you're about to lose your safety net, which is exactly what you need right now. As long as you have that factory job to fall back on, you'll always be tempted to play it safe, to keep putting off the risk of starting your own business. Now you don't have a choice. You have to be brave. That night, Maya didn't return to the Wellington mansion. Instead, she used some of her mother's money to rent a small studio apartment above a bakery on Hartford's south side. The space was tiny, just 400 square feet with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and large windows that looked out over the city's modest skyline. But it was hers, the first place she had ever lived where she didn't have to ask permission to exist. As she sat on the apartment's hardwood floor with her notebook spread open in front of her, Maya began sketching out a real business plan for the first time. She would call her company Sustainable Threads, a name that captured both her environmental values and her connection to the textile industry that had shaped her family's history. The plan was ambitious but achievable. She would start small, focusing on women's professional wear made from organic cotton and recycled materials. Her target customers would be young professionals who cared about ethics and quality, but couldn't afford luxury brands. She would manufacture everything locally, ensuring fair wages and sustainable practices while building a supply chain she could control and monitor. Maya picked up her phone and typed a text message to Rosie. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for keeping my mother's secret. Thank you for helping me take the first step toward the life I'm supposed to be living. The response came back within minutes. Elena's watching over both of us tonight. Get some sleep, businesswoman. Tomorrow, we start building your empire. Maya smiled as she looked around her tiny apartment, then out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there was the Wellington mansion, where Victoria was probably sleeping peacefully in her silk pajamas, confident that she had successfully crushed Maya's spirit and eliminated any threat to her position in the family hierarchy. But Victoria had made a crucial mistake. She had underestimated the power of a mother's love to transcend death, the strength of friendship to bridge generations, and the determination of a young woman who had finally found both the resources and the courage to fight for her dreams. Maya opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "Day 1 of the rest of my life. I have my mother's money, my mother's blessing, and my own unbreakable will. Victoria Wellington has no idea what's coming for her." The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city settling into night. Maya closed her notebook, turned off the lights, and lay down on the floor one last time. Not as punishment, but as a reminder of how far she had already come and how much further she intended to go. Tomorrow, she would begin building her empire. Tonight, she would dream of her mother's proud smile, and the day when she would walk back into the Wellington mansion, not as a rejected daughter, but as a successful businesswoman who had earned her place in the world through her own merits. The side-eyed girl who had slept on marble floors was becoming the woman who would own everything around her. Setting: Maya's textile factory, Hartford Industrial District, 3 years later, September 14th, 2023. The rhythmic hum of 37 industrial sewing machines filled the converted warehouse space that Maya had transformed into the headquarters of Sustainable Threads. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows she had personally cleaned and replaced, casting geometric patterns across the polished concrete floors where her carefully selected team of seamstresses, pattern makers, and quality control specialists worked with the kind of focused intensity that comes from believing in both their product and their purpose. Maya walked through the organized chaos of her factory floor, her designer blazer, one of her own creations made from organic cotton sourced from a family farm in North Carolina, marking her evolution from the exhausted girl who once slept on marble floors to the confident businesswoman who now employed nearly 40 people and had built a company valued at over $12 million in just 3 years. Maya, the buyer from Nordstrom, is here 15 minutes early, called Carmen Rodriguez, her production manager and the first employee she had. Hired when Sustainable Threads was still operating out of her studio apartment above the bakery. Carmen had been working at a sweatshop in Hartford's declining textile district when Maya found her. Underpaid and undervalued despite her 15 years of experience creating beautiful garments for companies that cared more about profit margins than the people who made their success possible. Maya checked her reflection in the window, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her blazer while taking a deep breath to calm the nervous energy that still surfaced before major business meetings. Today's presentation to Nordstrom could change everything. They were considering carrying her eco-friendly professional wear line in 43 stores across the Northeast, a distribution deal that would catapult Sustainable Threads from a regional success story to a nationally recognized brand. The conference room she had converted from a storage closet 3 months ago was modest but professional, with a reclaimed wood table she had built herself and samples of her latest designs displayed on rolling racks along the walls. Maya had learned early in her entrepreneurial journey that investors and buyers responded better to authentic passion than expensive facades, so she had invested her limited resources in quality products and fair wages rather than impressive office furniture. 3 executives in expensive suits sat around the table, their tablets and leather portfolios creating an intimidating contrast to Maya's humble conference space. Janet Stevens, Nordstrom's senior buyer for women's professional wear, was a woman in her 50s whose reputation for tough negotiations was legendary in the fashion industry. She had built her career on identifying emerging brands with both commercial potential and authentic brand stories. "Ms. Wellington," Janet began, spreading Maya's clothing samples across the table with the careful attention of someone who had examined thousands of garments over her 25-year career. "Your quality is exceptional, and your sustainability practices are exactly what our customers are demanding. We've been following Sustainable Threads for 6 months now, and your growth trajectory is impressive for such a young company." Maya maintained her composure despite the racing of her heart. The past 3 years had been a relentless marathon of 18-hour days, financial uncertainty, production challenges, and the constant pressure of proving that a young woman from a complicated family background could build something legitimate in an industry dominated by established players with decades of experience and unlimited resources. "We appreciate Nordstrom's interest in our brand," Maya replied professionally, though internally she was remembering the nights she had spent learning business law from library books and YouTube videos, teaching herself everything from contract negotiation to supply chain management through sheer determination and countless mistakes. Janet's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, consulted her tablet before speaking. Our market research shows that consumers are increasingly willing to pay premium prices for ethically produced clothing, especially in the professional wear category. Your brand story resonates particularly well with women aged 25 to 45 who are building their careers and want their clothing choices to reflect their values. The third executive, Michael Chen from Nordstrom's Strategic Partnerships division, leaned forward with interest. What impresses us most is your vertical integration. Most sustainable fashion brands outsource their manufacturing and have limited control over their supply chain. You've built everything in-house, which gives you quality control and ethical oversight that's virtually impossible to achieve otherwise. Maya felt a surge of pride at his recognition of what had been one of her most challenging and expensive decisions. While her competitors had chosen the easier path of contracting with existing manufacturers, Maya had invested heavily in her own production facility, hiring local workers at above-market wages and implementing environmental standards that exceeded industry requirements. Vertical integration was always part of our long-term strategy, Maya explained, standing to point at a detailed chart showing their supply chain from raw materials to finished products. We source our organic cotton directly from 3 family farms in North Carolina and Georgia, all of whom practice regenerative agriculture. Our dyes are plant-based and produced by a small company in Vermont that shares our environmental values. Every piece of hardware, buttons, zippers, thread, comes from suppliers who meet our standards for both quality and ethical labor practices. Janet made notes on her tablet while examining a charcoal gray blazer that represented hundreds of hours of design refinement and testing. Your price points are competitive despite the premium materials and ethical production methods. How do you maintain profitability while paying fair wages and using sustainable materials? This was the question Maya had been preparing for, the challenge that had kept her awake for countless nights as she struggled to build a business model that could be both profitable and principled. We achieve efficiency through careful design and minimal waste, she explained, pulling up spreadsheets on her laptop. Our patterns are optimized to use every inch of fabric, and our scraps are either recycled into accessories or composted through a partnership with local urban farms. We also focus on classic designs that won't go out of style, which allows for longer production runs and better economies of scale. Patricia consulted her research notes. Your customer retention rate is remarkable. Over 80% of your customers make repeat purchases within 12 months. That's significantly higher than industry average. Maya smiled, thinking of the hundreds of emails and letters she had received from customers who appreciated both the quality of her clothing and the story behind the brand. Our customers become advocates because they know exactly what they're supporting when they buy from us. They've visited our facility, met our seamstresses, seen our sustainability practices firsthand. It's not just about the clothes. It's about being part of something meaningful. Michael leaned back in his chair, studying Maya with the calculating gaze of someone who had seen hundreds of entrepreneurs pitch their dreams. Ms. Wellington, what makes you confident that you can scale this operation to meet Nordstrom's volume requirements? We're talking about potentially quadrupling your current production capacity. The question hit at Maya's deepest fear, the possibility of growing too fast and losing the quality and values that had built her reputation. But she had spent months preparing for this exact scenario, working with Carmen to develop expansion plans that could maintain their standards while meeting increased demand. We've identified a second facility in New Haven that would allow us to double our production capacity while maintaining our current quality standards, Maya replied, pulling out architectural plans and financial projections. The expansion would create 60 additional jobs, all at the same wage levels and benefits we currently provide. We've also established relationships with 2 additional organic cotton suppliers and identified qualified production managers who share our commitment to ethical manufacturing. Janet studied the expansion plans with obvious interest. The numbers look solid and your growth strategy appears well thought out. We'd like to offer you an exclusive contract for our women's professional wear department. Maya's breath caught as Janet named the figure, $2.3 million for the first year, with built-in escalators for growth and the potential for expansion into additional Nordstrom departments if the line performed well. The number represented more money than Maya had ever imagined possible when she was sleeping on the Wellington Mansion's marble floors just 4 years ago. I'll need to review the terms with my attorney and discuss the production timeline with my team, Maya said, maintaining her professional composure while her heart pounded with excitement and terror in equal measure. After the Nordstrom executives left, Maya found herself alone in the conference room, staring out the window at the Hartford skyline and trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Carmen appeared in the doorway, reading Maya's expression with the intuition that comes from working closely together through countless challenges. "Good news or bad news?" Carmen asked, settling into the chair across from Maya. "Life-changing news," Maya replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They want to carry our line in 43 stores. If we can execute this contract successfully, Sustainable Threads will become a legitimate national brand." Carmen's face broke into a huge smile. "Maya, do you realize what this means? 3 years ago, you were sketching designs on napkins in Rosie's Diner. Now you're about to have your clothes hanging in Nordstrom stores from Boston to Washington, D.C. Maya stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street where her employees were arriving for the afternoon shift. Many of them were immigrants like her mother had been, women who had struggled to find well-paying work despite their skills and experience. Building Sustainable Threads had never been just about her own success. It had been about creating opportunities for people who deserved better than the exploitative conditions that dominated much of the fashion industry. "Carmen, I need you to be honest with me," Maya said, turning away from the window. "Can we really do this? Can we scale up production without losing our soul as a company?" Carmen stood and joined Maya at the window, both women looking down at the employees who had become like family over the past 3 years. "Maya, you've never asked any of us to do anything you weren't willing to do yourself. You've worked longer, hours than anyone, taken smaller paychecks when money was tight, and never compromised on the values that built this company. If anyone can grow this business the right way, it's you." That evening, Maya drove through Hartford's evening traffic, toward the suburbs where she had purchased a modest 3-bedroom house 6 months earlier. The house was nothing like the Wellington Mansion, no marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but it was hers, paid for with money she had earned through her own efforts, rather than inherited through family connections. As she passed through the affluent neighborhood where the Wellington Mansion stood behind its imposing iron gates, Maya noticed a "for sale" sign that hadn't been there the week before. She pulled over and stared at the familiar facade, remembering the cold nights she had spent sleeping in that grand foyer, the cruel words Victoria had used to break her spirit, the silent disappointment of her father's refusal to defend his own daughter. Her phone buzzed with a text from her real estate agent, Jennifer Walsh, whom she had been working with to find commercial properties for the Sustainable Threads expansion. The Morrison estate came on the market today. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, 5 acres in West Hartford. Asking price $3.2 million and want to schedule a viewing. Maya stared at the photo Jennifer had attached. A magnificent colonial mansion even grander than the Wellington estate, with perfectly manicured grounds and enough space to house a small army. Just 3 years ago, such a property would have been as unreachable as the moon. Now, with the Nordstrom contract and her company's growing valuation, it was within the realm of possibility. She typed back, "Schedule a viewing for tomorrow afternoon. I want to see what we're capable of achieving." As Maya drove away from the Wellington Mansion, she felt a profound sense of completion mixed with anticipation for what lay ahead. The girl who had once been told she would never amount to anything had built a business that employed dozens of people and was about to expand nationwide. The daughter who had been rejected by her own family had created a new family among her employees and business partners. But more than personal vindication, Maya felt the satisfaction of proving that business could be both profitable and principled, that success didn't require sacrificing your values or exploiting others. Every garment that rolled off her production line represented fair wages for her workers, environmental responsibility, and quality that would last for years rather than seasons. That night, Maya sat in her home office surrounded by financial projections, expansion plans, and architectural drawings for the New Haven facility. Her phone rang, and Rosie's familiar voice filled the room with warmth and pride. "I heard through the grapevine that you had some important visitors today," Rosie said, the smile audible in her voice. "Word travels fast in Hartford's business community." Maya laughed. "We got the Nordstrom contract, Rosie. Sustainable Threads is going national. Elena would be so proud," Rosie said softly, not just of your success, but of how you've achieved it. You've built something beautiful, Maya, something that makes the world a little bit better. Maya looked around her office, at the framed photos of her employees, the thank you letters from customers, the sustainability awards hanging on the walls. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Rosie. Without your guidance, your friendship, without you giving me my mother's letter when I needed it most. Honey, I just opened the door. You're the one who had the courage to walk through it and build everything that came after. After ending the call, Maya opened her laptop and began typing an email to her entire team, sharing the news about the Nordstrom contract and outlining her vision for the company's expansion. She wanted every employee to understand that their hard work had made this success possible, and that the growth would benefit everyone who had contributed to building sustainable threads from the ground up. As she typed, Maya thought about the inscription her mother had written in that precious letter. You were born to build something beautiful in this world. 3 years later, Maya finally understood what Elena had seen in her daughter's future. Not just personal success, but the power to create opportunities for others, to prove that business could be a force for positive change in the world. Hero. Clock on her desk showed 11:47 p.m., but Maya wasn't tired. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities for growth and impact. The girl who had once slept on cold marble floors had become the woman who was building an empire based on fairness, sustainability, and the radical idea that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Maya saved her email and closed her laptop, then walked to the window of her home office. In the distance, the lights of Hartford twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing someone working toward their own dreams, facing their own challenges, building their own version of success. She was no longer the rejected daughter, sleeping on the floor of her family's mansion. She was Maya Wellington, CEO of Sustainable Threads, employer of 47 people, and architect of her own destiny. And tomorrow, she would continue building something beautiful in the world. Setting, Hartford Country Club, Annual Charity Gala, October 21st, 2023. 5 years later, the crystal chandeliers of the Hartford Country Club's grand ballroom cast. Prismatic rainbows across the sea of designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos as Connecticut's social elite gathered for the most prestigious charity event of the season. Maya Wellington stepped through the marble entrance with the confident grace of someone who had earned her place in this room through merit rather than birthright. Her custom-designed emerald green silk gown, a Sustainable Threads creation that had taken her design team 3 weeks to perfect, drawing admiring glances from guests who had no idea they were looking at the evening's primary sponsor. At 24, Maya had transformed from the forgotten daughter sleeping on cold floors to the CEO of a company now valued at over $50 million. Her success story had been featured on the covers of Forbes, Entrepreneur magazine, and Vogue Business, making her one of the most recognizable young businesswomen in New England. Tonight, however, she wasn't here to bask in her achievements. She was here because her company's sponsorship of the evening's fundraiser gave her a front row seat to witness the spectacular downfall of the family that had once treated her like an unwanted burden. The Hartford Children's Hospital benefit had always been Victoria Wellington's signature social event, the annual gathering where she could display her supposed philanthropy while networking with the kind of old money families that valued social connections above genuine charitable impact. For the past 5 years, Victoria had used this event to cement her position as Hartford society's unofficial queen, hosting elaborate dinner parties in the weeks leading up to the gala, and ensuring that her name appeared prominently in every newspaper society column. This year, however, things were different. Maya's company, Sustainable Threads, had outbid every other potential sponsor by contributing $250,000 to the Children's Hospital, more than double what Victoria's social circle typically raised through their elaborate but ultimately modest fundraising efforts. The irony of Maya's generosity wasn't lost on anyone who knew the Wellington family history, though most of the evening's guests remained unaware of the personal drama playing out beneath the polished veneer of charitable giving. Maya made her way through the cocktail reception, exchanging pleasantries with business leaders and politicians who had once viewed her as an oddity. Richard Wellington's daughter from his unfortunate first marriage, but now courted her favor as one of Connecticut's most successful young entrepreneurs. She had learned to navigate these social waters with the same strategic thinking that had built her business empire, understanding that every conversation was an opportunity to advance either her company's interests or her philanthropic goals. Maya, "Wellington, is that really you?" The voice cut through the elegant background chatter like a blade, causing Maya to turn with the measured composure she had perfected through years of high-stakes business negotiations. Victoria stood there in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But Maya's trained eye could see the telltale signs of financial strain that no amount of expensive fabric could hide: the slightly outdated jewelry, the shoes that had been resoled, the carefully applied makeup that couldn't quite conceal the stress lines that had appeared around Victoria's eyes over the past year. "Hello, Victoria," Maya replied, her voice steady and professional, devoid of any emotion that might give her stepmother the satisfaction of knowing that this encounter affected her. "You look, well, the past 5 years had not been kind to the Wellington family." Richard's continued poor business decisions, combined with Victoria's extravagant spending habits and their failure to adapt to changing market conditions, had systematically dismantled the textile fortune that had sustained the family for 4 generations. Maya knew this because she made it her business to know. The same way they had once made her feel powerless and worthless, she now monitored their financial decline from her position of strength and success. Wellington Textiles had lost 3 major contracts in the past 18 months. Their outdated manufacturing processes and inability to compete with more agile companies like Sustainable Threads had relegated them to producing low-margin commodity fabrics for discount retailers. The family's investment portfolio, once worth over $20 million, had been depleted through a series of desperate attempts to save the failing business and maintain their expensive lifestyle. "I heard about your little company," Victoria said, her smile as artificial as the diamonds in her earrings that Maya suspected were cubic zirconia replacements for jewelry that had been quietly sold to cover mounting debts. "How quaint, playing with fabrics and pretending to be a businesswoman, just like your mother used to pretend she belonged in polite society." Maya felt the familiar flash of anger at Victoria's mention of her mother, but years of meditation, therapy, and personal growth had taught her to channel that rage into something more productive than emotional reactions. "Actually, Sustainable Threads has been quite successful," she replied calmly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "We're expanding internationally next year, 12 countries initially, with plans for European and Asian markets by 2025. The color drained slightly from Victoria's face as she processed the implications of Maya's casual mention of international expansion. Such growth required substantial capital investment and sophisticated business operations, the kind of success that Victoria had convinced herself was impossible for someone of Maya's background and limited education. James appeared beside his mother, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting tuxedo that had clearly been rented rather than custom-tailored, like the ones he had worn in previous years. Once the golden boy who could do no wrong, heir to the Wellington fortune and Victoria's pride and joy, he had dropped out of 3 different colleges and now worked sporadically at his father's failing textile business, more of a liability than an asset to the struggling company. At 26, James showed the effects of years of privilege without responsibility. His face was puffy from too much alcohol and too little purpose. His posture spoke of someone who had never learned to stand on his own merits, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man who was slowly realizing that his inheritance might not be worth inheriting. "Maya," James nodded awkwardly, tugging at his collar like a schoolboy in his father's clothes. "You look different. Successful, I mean. Really successful. Success will do that to a person." Maya smiled, noting how James avoided direct eye contact. "I heard about the recent changes at Wellington Textiles. The textile industry can be challenging when you're not adapting to market demands and consumer preferences." Victoria's perfectly manicured facade cracked slightly. "The Wellington name still means something in this community, regardless of temporary business fluctuations. Some of us understand the importance of maintaining family legacy and social responsibility." Social responsibility? Maya raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious about Victoria's interpretation of a concept she had clearly never understood. "Is that what you call laying off 60 employees right before Christmas last year while maintaining your country club memberships and luxury car payments?" The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maya had done her research thoroughly. She knew exactly how the Wellington family had handled their financial crisis, prioritizing their own comfort over the livelihoods of longtime employees who had given decades of loyal service to the company. James shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that Maya's information was accurate but unwilling to defend decisions he had probably opposed but lacked the courage to prevent. That wasn't my choice, he mumbled, more to himself than to Maya. Choices, Maya mused, taking a sip of champagne while studying both of them with the calculating gaze of someone who had learned to read people's weaknesses as a survival skill. We all make them, don't we? Some of us choose to build something meaningful. Others choose to tear down what previous generations built through their own selfishness and incompetence. Victoria's composure finally cracked entirely. How dare you lecture us about family business? You were never really part of this family. You were a mistake, an accident that your father was too weak to correct when he had the chance. The words were designed to wound, to reduce Maya back to the insecure teenager who had once desperately sought approval from people who would never accept her. But Maya was no longer that girl, and Victoria's cruelty now seemed pathetic rather than powerful. You know what's interesting about mistakes, Victoria? Maya replied, her voice calm and measured. Sometimes they turn out to be the best thing that could have happened. My existence taught me self-reliance, determination, and the value of building something meaningful rather than simply inheriting it. Your treatment of me gave me the motivation to prove that character matters more than birthright. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. I notice that the Wellington estate has been listed with Pemberton Real Estate for the past 8 months. I suppose even family legacy has its price when the bills start piling up. Victoria's face flushed crimson. She hadn't realized that Maya would have access to information about the private listing, the family's desperate attempt to find a buyer before the bank moved forward with foreclosure proceedings that would destroy what remained of their social reputation. The Wellington estate is not for sale, Victoria insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. We're simply exploring our options for the future. Of course, Maya nodded sympathetically. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the 3 mortgage defaults, the unpaid property taxes, or the fact that Hartford National Bank has started foreclosure proceedings. Just exploring options. James looked genuinely shocked. Maya, how do you know about James? When you're successful in business, you develop relationships with people throughout the financial community. Maya explained patiently. Bank executives, real estate agents, lawyers, accountants, they all talk to each other. Your family's financial problems aren't exactly a secret among people who handle high-value transactions. The truth was that Maya had been monitoring the Wellington family's financial decline not out of malicious satisfaction, but as part of a larger plan she had been developing for over 2 years. She had the resources now to help them if she chose to, but any assistance would come with conditions that would fundamentally change the family dynamic that had caused so much pain. If you'll excuse me, Maya said, checking the elegant watch on her wrist, a gift she had bought for herself. To commemorate Sustainable Thread's first $1 million in revenue, I need to prepare for my speech. As tonight's primary sponsor, I have some important announcements to make about the future of charitable giving in our community. As Maya walked away, she heard Victoria hiss to James, how did she know about Pemberton? How does she know about the bank? What else does she know that we don't? Maya smiled to herself as she made her way toward the stage where a small crowd of hospital administrators and board members were waiting to thank their most generous supporter. The evening's program listed her as Ms. Maya Wellington, CEO and founder, Sustainable Threads. But she knew that most of the audience still thought of her as Richard Wellington's daughter rather than as an independent success story. That perception was about to change dramatically. The ballroom gradually quieted as Maya approached the podium, her emerald gown catching the light from the chandeliers and creating an almost ethereal presence on the stage. She had learned to command attention through confidence rather than volume, understanding that true authority came from competence and authentic passion rather than inherited position. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the room's excellent acoustics. Thank you for joining us tonight to support Hartford Children's Hospital, an institution that has provided life-saving care to thousands of families in our community, regardless of their ability to pay. She paused, making eye contact with various sections of the audience, noting where Victoria and James stood near the back of the room, their faces tense with anticipation about what Maya might say next. 5 years ago, I was a young woman with big dreams but limited resources, working multiple jobs while trying to build a business that could make a meaningful difference in our community. Maya continued, her voice gaining strength as she shared her story with people who had either ignored or dismissed her during her years of struggle. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Sustainable Threads will be establishing a permanent scholarship fund for the children of textile workers who want to pursue higher education. We're committing $5 million over the next 10 years to ensure that the sons and daughters of the people who build our clothing have the same opportunities as the children of the people who buy it. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic, but Maya wasn't finished with her announcements. Furthermore, she continued as the clapping subsided, Sustainable Threads will be opening a new manufacturing facility in Hartford's Riverside district, creating 250 new jobs with starting wages of $22 per hour and full benefits including health care, retirement savings, and profit sharing. This announcement drew even louder applause, particularly from the many guests who understood the economic impact of bringing well-paying manufacturing jobs back to Connecticut after decades of companies moving production overseas. But Maya's biggest announcement was still to come. "Finally," she said, waiting for complete silence before delivering the news that would transform her relationship with Hartford's business community forever. "I'm pleased to announce that Sustainable Threads has acquired the assets of Wellington Textiles, including their manufacturing equipment, their remaining inventory, and most importantly, their workforce." The gasps and murmurs that rippled through the audience were audible even from the stage. Maya watched as Victoria's face went completely white, and James grabbed his mother's arm to steady her as the implications of Maya's announcement sank in. "The acquisition will allow us to retain all current Wellington Textiles employees at improved wages and benefits, while modernizing their production capabilities to meet contemporary market demands," Maya explained, her voice remaining calm despite the emotional magnitude of what she was revealing. "We believe that Hartford's textile industry has a bright future when it's built on innovation, sustainability, and respect for the skilled workers who make it all possible. The Wellington family has been part of this community's history for over a century, and we're honored to continue that legacy in a way that serves both our employees and our customers." The standing ovation that followed was the longest of Maya's professional career, but she barely heard it. Her attention was focused on Victoria and James, who were pushing their way toward the ballroom's exit, clearly unable to process publicly what Maya's acquisition meant for their family's future. After her speech, Maya was surrounded by congratulations and business cards from people who wanted to partner with her expanding empire. But she politely extracted herself from the crowd and made her way toward the exit, knowing that the real conversation of the evening was still waiting to happen. She found Victoria and James in the country club's parking lot, standing beside a 10-year-old Mercedes that had clearly seen better days. Victoria was leaning against the car, her carefully constructed composure finally shattered, while James paced nervously nearby. "You planned this," Victoria said as Maya approached, her voice shaky with a mixture of rage and defeat. "You've been planning this revenge for years?" "Revenge?" Maya considered the word carefully. "Victoria, if I wanted revenge, I would have let Wellington Textiles collapse completely, putting all those employees out of work and leaving your family with nothing but debt and shame. Instead, I'm offering your workers better jobs and your family a chance to maintain some dignity." James stopped pacing and stared at Maya with something approaching desperation. "What do you want from us? Money? An apology? What?" Maya looked at both of them for a long moment. These people who had made her teenage years a misery, who had convinced her that she was worthless, who had driven her to sleep on marble floors while they enjoyed every comfort that inherited wealth could provide. "I want you to understand something," she said finally. "Success isn't about where you start. It's about how hard you're willing to work and how much you're willing to learn from your failures. You had every advantage imaginable, and you squandered it through arrogance and entitlement." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing with the offer she had been planning for months. "Your father can continue working for the company in a consulting role if he wants to contribute his knowledge of the industry's history and relationships. You, James, can start in our management training program if you're serious about learning the business from the ground up. And Victoria," Maya smiled slightly, "you can learn to live on a budget like everyone else." Victoria's eyes flashed with the old cruelty. "You think you've won something? You think owning a business makes you important? You're still the housekeeper's daughter, Maya. You'll never be anything more than that." "You're absolutely right," Maya replied, her smile growing wider. "I am Elena Vasquez's daughter, and I'm proud of everything that means. She taught me that true worth comes from what you build, not what you inherit. She showed me that dignity comes from how you treat others, not how others treat you." Maya walked toward her own car, a modest hybrid that reflected her values rather than her wealth, then turned back for one final comment. "The difference between us, Victoria, is that I learned from my mother's strength, while you never learned anything at all. Enjoy the rest of your evening." As Maya drove home through Hartford's quiet streets, she felt a profound sense of completion. The girl who had once slept on cold marble floors had become the woman who now controlled the business empire that had rejected her. But more importantly, she had proven that success built on integrity and hard work was more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow her business and help her employees build better lives for their families. Tonight, she would sleep peacefully in her own bed, in her own house, bought with money she had earned through her own efforts. The tables hadn't just turned, they had been completely rebuilt, and Maya Wellington was the architect of everything that came next. Setting: the Wellington family estate. 6 months later, April 15th, 2024. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Wellington mansion's grand foyer, illuminating the same marble floor where Maya had once slept, as punishment for daring to dream beyond her circumstances. Now, at 25, she stood in that exact spot holding the deed to the entire estate, having purchased the property at a private auction for $2.8 million in cash, a transaction that had taken less than 24 hours to complete. Once the bank had accepted her offer, the mansion looked exactly as Maya remembered it from her childhood and teenage years, yet everything felt fundamentally different now that she owned every inch of marble, every crystal chandelier, every hand-carved molding that had once represented everything she could see but never truly possess. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now held legal title to the building that had housed both her greatest misery and her most powerful motivation to succeed. Richard sat in his old leather chair in the study, the same seat where he had remained, silent while Victoria crushed his daughter's dreams 5 years earlier. But the man occupying the chair now bore little resemblance to the confident businessman who had once commanded respect in Hartford's financial circles. At 57, Richard looked like someone who had aged a decade in the past 2 years, his shoulders permanently stooped with the weight of poor decisions and moral compromises that had cost him everything he had inherited and most of what he had built. Victoria paced frantically by the tall windows that overlooked the estate's manicured gardens, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors in an irregular rhythm that betrayed her barely controlled panic. The woman who had once ruled this house like an imperious queen now looked like someone who had been stripped of everything that had given her identity meaning: her social position, her financial security, her ability to intimidate others through inherited privilege. James stood near the ornate fireplace where family portraits had hung for generations, most of which had been quietly sold over the past year to cover mounting debts and legal fees. His posture reflected the defeated resignation of someone who had finally realized that his birthright was worthless and his future would depend on his own efforts rather than his family's rapidly diminishing reputation. "I still don't understand how this happened so quickly," Victoria kept repeating, her voice taking on the hysterical edge of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed in a matter of months. Anonymous buyer, cash offer, immediate closing. It's impossible. Real estate transactions don't work that way. Maya set her leather purse on the mahogany table where she had once been forbidden to eat, the simple gesture carrying symbolic weight that everyone in the room understood. She was no longer the powerless girl who could be banished to sleep on floors or denied basic respect. She was the owner of everything around them, and their continued presence in the house depended entirely on her generosity and their willingness to accept new terms. "I bought it fair and square through the foreclosure auction," Maya said calmly, removing her gloves and placing them beside her purse with the measured movements of someone who had learned to project authority through controlled composure. "All cash, no financing contingencies, exactly as the bank requested in their sale requirements." The foreclosure process had been swift and inevitable once Wellington Textiles collapsed completely. Despite Maya's acquisition of the company's assets and workforce, the family's personal debts had continued to mount, fueled by years of using the estate as collateral for increasingly desperate business loans and Victoria's refusal to reduce her extravagant spending even as their income disappeared. Maya had monitored the situation carefully, not out of malicious satisfaction, but as part of a larger plan she had been developing ever since her success with Sustainable Threads had given her the resources to consider larger philanthropic projects. The mansion represented more than personal vindication. It was an opportunity to create something meaningful that could benefit the broader community while addressing her own complicated relationship with her family's history. "What do you want from us?" Richard finally spoke, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and shame. The question carried the weight of a man who had finally realized that his daughter had become more successful than he had ever been, despite every advantage he had possessed and every obstacle he had allowed to be placed in her path. Maya studied the man who had once been her hero, the father who had lifted her onto his shoulders to watch 4th of July fireworks and taught her to ride a bicycle in the mansion's circular driveway. Somewhere beneath the broken businessman sat the person who had once loved her unconditionally before Victoria's influence had eroded his spine and his ability to defend his own daughter. "I want to offer you a choice," Maya said, walking to the mantelpiece where a few remaining family photographs still sat among spaces where valuable items had once been displayed. "You can stay here as my tenants, paying reasonable rent that reflects your current financial situation. Or you can leave, and I'll help you find somewhere suitable for your reduced circumstances." She picked up a silver-framed photo of herself at age 7, taken during the last family Christmas before her mother's death, when the mansion had still felt like a home rather than a prison. "This house is going to be transformed into something that actually serves the community instead of just housing people who inherited more than they deserved." Victoria whirled around, her face flushed with indignation that seemed almost comical given her complete lack of leverage in the situation. "Tenants? In our own home? You can't be serious. This is the Wellington family estate. It's been in our family for over a century." "It's not your home anymore, Victoria," Maya replied with the patience of someone explaining simple facts to a child. "It's my home now, and I own it legally and completely. But unlike you, I don't throw family members out on the street without cause or consideration." The word family hung in the air between them, heavy with years of pain and rejection. Maya had spent considerable time in therapy, working through her complex feelings about these people who shared her DNA, but had never truly accepted her as one of their own. Her success had given her the power to be vindictive, but her mother's lessons about dignity and character had taught her to choose a different path. "Family?" Victoria laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and desperate. "You were never really family, Maya. You were an obligation, a burden that Richard was too weak to handle properly. I was a child who deserved love and got cruelty." "Instead," Maya interrupted, her voice remaining calm despite the familiar surge of anger that Victoria's words still triggered. "But that pattern ends here, with me. I refuse to perpetuate the cycle of using power to hurt people who are vulnerable." She walked toward the tall windows that looked out over the estate's sprawling grounds, imagining how the property would look once her renovation plans were implemented. "I'm converting this mansion into a residential training center for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, kids who have great ideas but lack the resources and connections to turn their dreams into reality." Richard looked up sharply, his expression showing the first spark of genuine interest he had displayed since Maya's arrival. "The Wellington estate? For charity?" "For opportunity," Maya corrected, turning back to face the 3 people who had made her teenage years a nightmare of psychological warfare and deliberate humiliation. "I'm creating a program that provides housing, mentorship, business education, and startup capital for young people who have the talent and determination to succeed but lack the family connections and inherited wealth that make entrepreneurship easier." The program Maya envisioned would house 24 young entrepreneurs at a time, providing them with private bedrooms, shared common spaces, fully equipped workshops and computer labs, and access to successful business mentors who could guide them through the process of building sustainable companies. The mansion's 12 bedrooms could be converted into comfortable living spaces, while the grand public rooms would become classrooms, meeting spaces, and presentation areas. The program will focus particularly on young women, immigrants, and first-generation college graduates, people who face systemic barriers to accessing traditional business networks and venture capital. Maya continued, her voice gaining energy, as she outlined her vision for transforming her childhood prison into someone else's launching pad toward success. Each cohort will spend 18 months in residence, working on their business plans while taking courses in everything from financial management to marketing strategy to legal compliance. They'll graduate with a functioning company, ongoing mentorship relationships, and connections to a network of successful alumni who can support their continued growth. James had been listening intently, and Maya could see something like hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since she had known him as an adult. Maya, that sounds incredible. Really incredible. Where did you get the idea for something like that? Maya smiled, remembering all the nights she had spent dreaming of escape while lying on the cold marble floor of this very room. I got the idea from personal experience. I know what it's like to have big dreams but no support system, to face barriers that seem impossible to overcome, to feel like your circumstances define your limitations. But I also learned that the right combination of opportunity, mentorship, and resources can help anyone build something meaningful, regardless of where they start in life. This mansion will give other young people what I had to find for myself, a chance to prove that talent and determination matter more than family connections or inherited privilege. Victoria was shaking her head frantically, as if refusing to accept that her former stepdaughter could transform the symbol of Wellington family prestige into something that would actually benefit people who needed help rather than people who already had everything. You can't just change everything, Victoria protested weakly. This house has history, tradition, social significance in Hartford's community. You can't turn it into some kind of school for people who don't belong here. People who don't belong here? Maya raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious about Victoria's definition of belonging. You mean people like my mother, who worked harder than anyone in this house but was never considered worthy of respect? People like me, who you spent 5 years trying to convince that she didn't deserve basic human dignity? She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing with the compassion that had taken years of personal growth to develop. Victoria, the only people who don't belong here are people who use their advantages to hurt others instead of helping them. This house will finally fulfill its potential by serving people who will appreciate the opportunity rather than taking it for granted. Maya walked to her purse and pulled out a folder containing legal documents that would formalize the arrangements she was offering to her family members. You have 30 days to decide whether you want to stay as tenants or find other living arrangements. If you choose to stay, there will be ground rules about how everyone in this house is treated. She placed the folder on the mahogany table, noting how different it felt to set documents there as an owner, rather than approaching the table as a supplicant seeking permission for basic opportunities like education or respect. The rental agreement includes clauses about respectful behavior toward all residents and staff. There will be no tolerance for the kind of cruelty and psychological manipulation that characterized this house during Victoria's reign. Everyone who lives here, family members, program participants, staff, will be treated with basic human dignity. Richard stood up slowly, his movement suggesting both physical and emotional exhaustion. Maya, I need you to know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not defending you when you needed me most. I'm sorry for choosing the easy path instead of doing what was right. I'm sorry for letting Victoria convince me that keeping peace was more important than protecting my own daughter. The apology hit Maya harder than she had expected, touching wounds that had healed but left permanent scars. She had spent years preparing for this moment, imagining various scenarios and practicing different responses, but hearing her father finally acknowledge his failures still brought tears to her eyes. I appreciate the apology, Dad, Maya said softly, using the title she hadn't spoken aloud in over 3 years. But apologies only matter if they're followed by changed behavior. If you choose to stay here, you'll need to prove that you've learned from your mistakes. James stepped forward, his expression showing a vulnerability that Maya had never seen from her privileged half-brother. Maya, I know I don't deserve it, but could I be part of the program? Not as a participant, but maybe as someone who could help with business mentoring or administrative work? I want to learn how to actually contribute something meaningful instead of just coasting on family name. Maya studied James carefully, looking for signs of genuine commitment versus the kind of temporary enthusiasm that had characterized his approach to every previous opportunity. The program will have paid positions for people who demonstrate real value to our participants. If you're serious about learning and contributing, we can discuss possibilities. But understand this, she continued, her voice taking on the firm tone she used with employees who needed clear expectations. There won't be any special treatment because of your last name. You'll start at entry level and advance based on your performance and dedication, just like everyone else who works for me. James nodded eagerly, seeming to understand that Maya was offering him something no one else ever had, the chance to earn his place through merit rather than inheritance. Victoria remained silent by the windows, staring out at the gardens that would soon be filled with young entrepreneurs working on projects that could change their lives and communities. Maya could see that her stepmother was struggling to process a reality where her former victim had become her landlord and her social superior. "Victoria," Maya said gently, recognizing that even cruel people deserved basic compassion when they were defeated and powerless. "I know this is difficult for you to accept. Your entire identity was built around social position and inherited status. But you have a choice now. You can learn to find meaning in something other than looking down on people you consider beneath you." She walked toward the foyer where she had spent so many cold, painful nights, remembering the girl who had whispered promises to herself about someday owning this place. "The training center will need administrative support, event coordination, alumni relations management. If you're willing to work honestly and treat people with respect, there could be opportunities for you too." Maya paused at the spot where she had once lain on the marble floor, then looked up at the crystal chandelier that had witnessed both her lowest moments and now her greatest triumph. "But if you choose to stay, you need to understand that the days of anyone sleeping on floors as punishment are over forever. This house will be a place where people are built up rather than torn down." She headed toward the front door, her business in the mansion complete for now. Tomorrow would bring contractors, architects, and program coordinators who would begin the massive renovation project that would transform the Wellington estate from a monument to inherited privilege into a launching pad for earned success. "You have my contact information," Maya said, turning back for one final look at the family that had shaped her through both their cruelty and their failures. "Let me know your decisions by May 15th. The training center construction begins June 1st with or without you." As Maya walked toward her car, still the modest hybrid that reflected her values rather than her wealth, she felt a profound sense of completion mixed with anticipation for the future. The girl who had once been told she would never amount to anything had acquired the very symbol of everything she had been denied, but more importantly, she was transforming it into something that would help others overcome similar obstacles. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rosie. "Saw the news about the mansion purchase. Your mama would be so proud. Not just of your success, but of your heart. You're going to change so many lives." Maya smiled as she typed back, "She's the reason I know how to turn pain into purpose. The house that tried to break me is going to help other people build their dreams." That evening, Maya stood in her own modest home office, surrounded by architectural plans for the mansion renovation and applications from the first group of young entrepreneurs who wanted to join the residential program. The responses had been overwhelming. Hundreds of young people from across New England and beyond, all with compelling stories and innovative business ideas that just needed the right support to flourish. As she reviewed applications, Maya found herself thinking about the inscription her mother had written in that precious letter. "You were born to build something beautiful in this world." 5 years later, Maya finally understood the full scope of what Elena had envisioned for her daughter's future. The Wellington mansion would become more than just Maya's personal victory over the family that had rejected her. It would become a symbol of how inherited privilege could be transformed into earned opportunity, how family legacies could be redefined by values rather than wealth, and how one person's success could become a ladder for others to climb. Maya opened her laptop and began typing an email to the staff at Sustainable Threads, sharing her vision for the Wellington Entrepreneurship Center and outlining how the training program would integrate with her company's mission of creating opportunities for people who had traditionally been excluded from business networks. As she wrote, Maya thought about all the young people who would sleep comfortably in the mansion's converted bedrooms, working late into the night on business plans that could change their lives and communities. They would never know that the woman who created their opportunity had once been forced to sleep on the cold marble floors of the same building, but they would benefit from every lesson she had learned during those painful nights. The clock on Duriu Saza. Her desk showed 11:30 p.m., but Maya wasn't tired. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand both her business and her philanthropic impact. The mansion renovation would take 8 months to complete, but the program it would house could benefit young entrepreneurs for decades to come. Maya saved her email and closed her laptop, then walked to the window of her home office where she could see the distant lights of Hartford twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere in those lights was the Wellington mansion, soon to be filled with the sounds of young people pursuing their dreams, with the kind of support and encouragement Maya had been forced to find for herself. She was no longer the rejected daughter sleeping on her family's marble floors. She was Maya Wellington, successful entrepreneur, generous philanthropist, and architect of second chances for people who deserved better than their circumstances. The girl who had once whispered promises to herself in the darkness had become the woman who could make other people's promises come true. The mansion that had housed her greatest pain was about to become the source of other people's greatest opportunities. The circle wasn't just complete. It had been transformed into something more beautiful than anyone could have imagined when it began with a young woman sleeping on a cold floor, dreaming of the day when she would own everything around her, and use that power to lift others up rather than tear them down. Maya turned off the lights and headed toward her bedroom, but not before whispering a quiet thank you to her mother's memory, and to Rosie, whose friendship had helped her understand that true success meant building bridges rather than walls. Tomorrow, the real work would begin.